Welcome back, or if it's your first time, welcome for the first time to the Investor Guys podcast. That gentleman saluting you is Bill Barnett, and I am
Good
Kevin
morning.
Mill. And we hope we've got lots of hungry investors on the show with us today, because we are going to talk about just a little bit of news real quick, but we're also going to talk about, we're doing a series on getting back to basics and just starting fresh. And if you're a seasoned investor, this is a good refresher for you. A lot of people who watch us are wanting to get started as real estate investors. Take this as a blueprint to get out there, GOIB, and get it done. Today we're going to talk about running numbers, but let's talk about an interesting little factoid that Bill sprung on me this morning. Bill, I'll let you talk about that.
So some news came out of Canada that they were starting to do long mortgages. Now, we heard talk of this back in the 07, 08 in the Obama crash. And what they're doing a little different than what we were talking about back then. The mortgage industry back then, 07, 08, was talking about, okay, so let's look at doing 50, 40, 50, 60-year mortgages, fixed rate, and just length them on out so people can afford the payment, which, by the way, is a disaster. So interesting twist now coming out of Canada. So one of the things that was very popular was the adjustable rate mortgage. So that you might get I've had several where you get a 10-year lock-in, and then after 10 years, the rate adjusts. So sometime during that 10 years, I'd always look at how can I refi into a better rate that's locked in before I get to the end of the 10 years locked in rate on the adjustable rate mortgage. So what Canada is starting to offer is, okay, let's have an adjustable rate mortgage, but the payment be fixed. So let's say it's a $1,500 a month mortgage payment, the 30-year mortgage, 30-year amortization, but it's adjustable rate. So as the rate starts to go up, your payment does not change. The length of your mortgage is what changes. And so the examples they were giving was it could go all the way up to 70 years. So you'd have a fixed payment, but still have an adjustable rate, and where the time or where it's affected is in the length of the mortgage. So interesting twist on taking your mortgage out there longer. Remember, the World Economic Forum has preached to us, you will own nothing and you will like it. So, this could be a way of getting us there.
Absolutely better for the banks than it is for the home buyer.
Oh, yeah.
Consider anything like that. That is the banks running the government right there.
Well, and when you look at, a regular fixed rate 30-year mortgage, the first 5 to 7 years is almost exclusively interest.
Yes.
All right. So when you go, we were doing this comparison back in 07, 08. When you go to a 40-year mortgage, instead of it being the first 5 to 7 years, it's the first 8 to 10 years is almost exclusively interest. So you can imagine if you go to 50 years, it's probably the first 12 to 15 years. And that little spread there is just a difference in rate. 12 to 15 years. If you go to a 60-year mortgage, it's probably 15 to 17 years. And you go to a 70-year mortgage, it's probably the first 20 years of the mortgage is almost exclusively interest.
Yeah. And if you've ever done a mortgage before, you know that your rate is based on prime plus or prime plus. And that gives the banks carte blanche to make all kinds of money off of that plus, and it gives the government the ability to raise interest rates in order to put more money into the pockets of the government, for one, because it's interest rates are going to the government, and they're also going to the criminals in charge. I'm trying to find a better way to say it. Criminals in charge.
When you're going to be accurate, you got to be accurate.
Yeah. And your plus is a percentage of what the interest is. So as the interest goes up, that plus or plus that the bank is charging you on that prime is putting more and more money in their pocket. Always look for a fixed rate. What Bill was talking about was a 10-year fixed. If you believe you can flip a property or be out of it within 10 years, awesome tool to use. If you're going to be in it long term and you think you're going to be able to refinance it after 10 years, it's something to consider. If it's something I'm using for my personal home and I think I might have it for 30 years, I do not want a 10-year fixed. I will go with a 30-year fixed, or a 15-year fixed is actually my preference.
Yeah.
15-year fixed will be a payment that's slightly larger than your 30-year fixed, and you'll be paying it off a lot faster, and you'll be paying principal a lot faster. That said, let's talk about running numbers, because we talked about getting off your butt, getting out, looking at listings, and making offers. And I know a lot of you people who are watching these things in order, you're thinking, why will we get out and make offers when I don't know how to run the numbers? How am I going to make offers? Two things. First of all, if you're making offers, you're going to figure out how to run the numbers. It's not rocket science. All you have to do is figure out every cost that you have. And Bill and I are going to go over that just to make sure you don't forget anything. Okay. Yep. You're going to cover all the costs that you have, and that includes the cost of your money and everything else. You're going to weigh that against your potential profit from the property, and that's running your numbers. It's that simple. Now, there's some tools that we use. There's some comparisons that we use. There's things that we do to get an idea what those numbers are going to be, and we're going to cover that in this show. But that's why we told you, get out there, make offers, because once you start making the offers, you're going to say, you know what? I got to figure out how to get this house. I got to figure out how to get this property, because this is a good deal. This is money in my pocket. This is money that I'm passing on. I want to tell you guys something, and Bill and I have them. Every single investor has them, okay? A deal that we either didn't act on fast enough that was an amazing deal, or a deal that somebody else snatched from in front of us because either we weren't too fast enough, or we thought about it too long, or they got there an hour before we did. Okay. There's those deals that we wish we had, like, oh my gosh, it was such a great deal. It was this, it was that. The person who got it made so much freaking money. Don't have those deals. Don't let that be your portfolio of tears, essentially. All these lost deals that you could have had because you failed to act. You failed to act fast enough. You got a paralysis of the analysis. It's a bittersweet story, and it's more bitter than sweet. All right, we're up on a break, and we're going to start talking about numbers when we get back.
Excellent.
And we are back, and we are talking today about running numbers. Once you make that offer, or before you make the offer, run the numbers so you know what to make the offer for and whether it's going to be a good deal and what kind of profit you're looking at. There are a lot of people have different thresholds for profit. Bill and I like 40,
Yep.
50%, and that's annually. Okay. So keep in mind, if you're doing 3 deals at 20% profit for each deal, you're making 60% annually, and 20% should be pretty easy to find
Yeah.
on a profit or on a flip,
Yeah.
So keep those factors in mind. We want about 40 to 50% or greater, annually for our investment. So we're going to run our numbers, and we're going to start with what, Bill? What's the first thing we look at aside from the asking price of the property? What is the next thing we look at?
Yeah, for me, the very next thing, Kev, is the after repaired value. Everything when I'm putting together an offer, I've always got to start with, what is this house going to sell for when it's in great condition, when it's pristine, when it's drop dead gorgeous? What is it that it will sell for in this neighborhood, in this market? And so when I've got that number, now I can reverse engineer and start taking away from that to get down to what I'm going to offer. But the very first thing you've got to do is figure out what that after repaired value is.
Yeah. And for those of you guys who are just starting out, a lot of times you'll hear ARV. ARV stands for after repair value. Now,
Yep.
The easy way for us to find out generally what that after repair value is by pulling comps for that neighborhood. Comps are short for comparables. Okay. We're looking at comparable sales in that market. Now, in addition to comparable sales, which are recent sales in that market within a certain circumference of where that property is located, I also look at what other properties are selling for, because it is not unusual to get into a neighborhood and your last comp was from 3 years ago. Hopefully you've got
Could
properties,
be, yeah.
Properties that are selling. So if you're looking at a comp that's 3 years old, that's not necessarily a good barometer for what you need to be doing, especially in markets like Bill and I that have blown up in the last 3 years. So I will check and see if there are other properties in the area that are for sale and see what they are listing at, so that I can basically piggyback off of their homework. Now, if they're all over the place, then I'm going to take basically a value, an overall value. So let's say I have 5 different properties for sale in the area, and I don't have a comp going back for 3 years. I don't have a comp in the area at all. I take the square footage of all of those properties and I add them up. And I take the value of all of those properties and I add them up. And then I divide that value by 5 so that I have an average value, an average asking value per square foot for that area. And then I know roughly what my property should sell for. That's another good thing to do when you're dealing with custom homes. When you have houses that are not the same plan, okay, it's difficult to say, well, this 3-bedroom, 2-bath is selling for X amount of dollars because it's totally different plan. Your 3-bedroom, 2-bath may be larger. Your 3-bedroom, 2-bath may be smaller. So get an average of square footage, because that is one of the things that will break down that's one of the things that the appraiser will do. If he can't find comps in the area, he will take an average of the sales in the area, and he will break it down by square footage, and they will take that amount and multiply it by the square footage of the property that you are getting. All of that information is in your listing. The square footage of the property that you're buying is in the listing. It'll also tell you in your listing what the cost is per square footage based upon what the asking price of the property is. So getting that number is really not difficult at all. So once we have that number, we're able to, as Bill said, reverse engineer and figure out what our spread is, essentially. And our spread is, how much are they asking for the property? How much can we get for the property? And how much is it going to cost us in between to get us to that point? Now, another thing, and I know Bill does this as well, and any smart investor does, don't just assume because you're going in there and rehabbing this house, hopefully, yes, you will get top dollar for it. But I always run my numbers on a median versus a high average. I go with a medium average and hope for the best. But I know that if I can make a profit with a median average, then I can absolutely knock it out of the park
Yeah.
with a high average. So don't just assume because the highest property in the area is selling for X that that's what your property is going to sell for. Those people may be selling their property and they may be crazy. They may have marked their property way up, you know, and that property, I recently just saw this happen. We had friends who moved out of the area. They were worried because there were two properties that were in the market and this literally on either ends of the street, same exact model as theirs, had been sitting on them. One of them had been for 4 months, the other one had been for 8 months, and they had just knocked the value down on that particular property. They ended up selling their house in 30 days, literally 30 days, because they priced it fairly. They took the average for the neighborhood, they divided it by the square footage of their property, and they were able to sell their house while those other two houses are literally sitting. They closed at the beginning of this month. Those other two houses are still sitting there, unsold for months in Florida. If they had based the sales price of their house on either of those homes, they would still be sitting on market on that house, and they would not have been able to. They would have to find another strategy because they needed to move out of state in order to do some things. Like I said, don't just assume that the high price is the right price. Okay. Do your homework a little bit. It's not hard. You can literally do it in a matter of 10, 15 minutes. Now, our next steps we're going to talk about when we get back from this break, and they are literally just as simple and as easy to figure out. And we'll be back in just a second. And we are back for our final segment on the show on running numbers. We talked about how to get to what the value of the property should be when you're done with it and you're ready to put it on the market. Let's talk about the other costs that you're going to have besides purchasing this property between the time you purchase the property, you acquire the property, and the time you cash out on the property. That's close of escrow. Okay. So remember that it takes typically 30 days for you to close escrow. So whatever you think it's going to be to rehab your property, add 30 days minimum to that so that you can figure out what your time frame is going to be. And when I say add 30 days, you're like, well, what's it matter if it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? Because you're paying a mortgage on that property. You are paying interest on that property. You're paying insurance on that property. You are paying taxes on that property. And I just gave you 3 of your costs that you need to factor in. Your cost of money, that is your mortgage and your interest rate for that property. Your taxes, you own that property for that period of time. Even if it's just 2 months or 3 months, you are responsible for the property tax while you own the property. That's not something the next property owner is going to pick up. That's something they factor in when they close escrow. Your insurance. You have to have insurance on this property or you will not be able to finance the property. First of all, it's also just good sense. You would hate to get a property, get an investment property and find out that while you weren't there overnight, it burned down to the ground and you didn't have insurance on it.
Yeah.
Insurance is
That'd
just
be pretty
a good
brutal.
idea, and it's going to be required. No one's going to finance the property unless
Right.
there's insurance on the property.
Right.
Other costs that you're going to have to factor in are utilities. You have to have water, you have to have electricity, you have to have natural gas if you've got gas there. While these repairs are going on, because you've got people who are going to be using the electricity, you have people who are going to be using the water in order to rehab this property. So you've got cost of utilities. You also have other costs. For example, you're going to have to mow the lawn outside. Okay, you're going to have to do HOA fees, whatever it is. There's additional costs, and you have to figure out what those are going to be. In addition to what, Bill?
Well, I guess some more things to add on to how we get that number on what we're going to pay for this thing, because we haven't and I do mine a little differently than a lot of people do. So once we get those comps set up, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knock 28.5% off of that number right off the bat. And that 28.5% is going to be 20% profit, so that we're making a minimum of 20% cash on cash, or not cash on cash return on investment off of the retail price of the property. So if we're selling this thing for $300,000, I'm taking $60,000 off the top as a minimum. That's 20% of the retail price of the property. Then I'm going to take commission off of it. So I know you're going to say, wait a minute, well, commission is paid by the seller. That's true. But if I'm flipping this property pretty quickly, I'm going to be the seller. So I want to account for that 6%. So I'll take that out on my bid as well. Then I'll take about 2.5% out for closing costs. I can hear people right now rolling their eyes. Bill, that's way too high for closing costs. Closing costs is about half that. Yep, you're right, it is. But we got closing costs when we buy it, and then we're going to have that closing cost again when we sell it. So I want to account for that right now, and I want to take a minimum of 28.5% out, and that's before I take any contingency out, which I'm likely to do. So I want to take that 28.5% out. Then I got to figure out what my rehab budget is. And once I get my rehab budget established, I'm going to remove that number as well. And what's left is the highest offer I can possibly make. It's a maximum allowable offer. That's the highest offer I can make on this particular property. And I'm likely going to be under that. But once I get to that number, that maximum number, I want to compare that number with what they're asking for the property. And what I'm looking for all the time is that my maximum allowable offer is at or higher than what they want for the property. Now I got a deal on my hands. Yes. If my number is less than what they're asking for, I've got to go back and make an offer that's lower than they might want to accept. Now, as inventory changes, and that happens as the market changes, I can offer under ask and expect to get the property in many cases. When the markets are hot, like Florida and Texas are, I need to be at or very close to what they're asking as much as I can. So I just got to run my numbers and make sure that when I'm offering this for the property, that it's a good, solid deal.
Yeah. And don't let that scare you, because bottom line is if you're not getting that property for the right price, you're not going to make a profit. You know, you may even lose money. Okay. So if you have to go back and the right number for you is not the number that they're asking, it's lower than the number that they're asking, then you need to make that offer, because that is the number that works. And no matter what, you know what that number is. If they're not willing to accept it, don't meet them anywhere else. Don't meet them.
Move on.
Anywhere else. You're not buying this property because you're the end user. You are buying this property to make a profit. If you're not going to make a profit, it makes no sense whatsoever for you to buy this property, to put in this time, put in this effort, and turn around and not make a profit. Pass on it. Find something else that you can invest in that's going to give you the profit that you're looking for. So don't say, oh well, if the numbers don't work, I'm what am I? I hear so much frustration. So you know what? You go out and you find another property where the numbers work. I promise, if you are looking at listings, if you are running your numbers, if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing as a real estate investor, you will find properties where the numbers make sense. They may not be pretty properties. They may stink. They may smell like cat urine. They may look like they had a herd of dogs in there. Okay. All those things can be fixed. All right. I tell people, I don't care how beautiful the property is. If the numbers don't work, don't get it. It may look great. It may look like it's going to be this, that, or the other. If the numbers don't work, don't get it. I don't care how ugly or stinky or how much you want to puke when you walk past the house. If the numbers work, get the property. You're not going to be the property. Your contractor is going to go in. They're going to cut all that nasty drywall out for the first 4 feet that smells like cat urine or whatever else they had in there, and it's going to be replaced. The next owner will have no clue whatsoever unless the neighbors tell them, they'll have no clue, because when they see that, it's going to have beautiful paint on it. It's going to have new drywall. It's going to have great floors. It's going to have an upgraded kitchen. It's going to have upgraded bathrooms.
And no odor.
Exactly. It's going to be a great house. It's going to have that new house smell. It's going to have new carpet, new tile, new wood floors, everything else in it. The numbers have to work, or it does not work. Do not do it. I don't care how much your wife loves it or your husband loves it or how much you think it's a cute neighborhood. Boil it down to the numbers.
Yep.
That's it. Bottom line. And we gave you everything you should factor in for your numbers. Now, there may be some other things, like I said, HOA fees if you're buying in an HOA. There might be a few other random costs, here and there. If you're buying in certain markets, you have to consider what's it going to cost for me to have somebody come out here and shovel sidewalks for the 3 months that I'm doing this in December or January. Whatever those little things are, use your head, figure out what they are. Your contractor is going to factor in everything else that they need, how much it's going to cost to remove the debris that they're removing out of the property, how much it's going to cost for them to do this, that, or the other. Consider that your electric bill and your water bill are probably going to be pretty high for the 2 or 3 months that you're doing the rehab on this property, because they're going to be running power tools for 8+ hours a day. They're going to be hosing things off. They're going to be leaving the hose running in the front yard. They're going to be doing all kinds of things. So factor that in. But again, you're only paying, if you're doing this right, you're only paying 2 or 3 months of those utilities. You're only paying 2 or 3 months of those holding costs. Make sure that you've got a good grasp on your time that you're going to have to invest into this, because your time is going to tell you what your money cost is going to be. Anything else to add before we get out of here, Mr. Barnett?
If you do the numbers right, the business will always take care of you. Don't fudge on the numbers. If it's a skinny deal, walk away from it. Now, we said 20%. That's not the goal. That's not the target. That's the minimum. That's the floor. I'm not going below that. I'm going to be higher than that in most cases. But that is the absolute bare minimum that I'm willing to move forward on a deal on.
Yeah. And remember, we're not talking 20% a year. If you're able, you should be able to do this in 2 or 3 months. Okay. But let's say it takes you 4 months to do this. All right. You're doing this 3 times in a year. That is 60% return on your money. That's a 60%. Listen to that. 60% return on your money. You're not going to find anywhere else. One of the things that I do real quick, just to talk about numbers, I do LOIs on properties, and I flip those typically in less than 1 month. And I typically do it for 10 to 20% more than the earnest money deposit that I've left on the LOI. Now you're saying 10%, 10%. It's 120%, because I'm doing one of these every single month with the same money. So those little percentages, they add up. So don't go and say, okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do 2 houses at 10% for, for every 3 months or 4 months, then I'll get my 20%. If you want to put in that kind of work, that's fine, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
20% is doable. 20% is pretty much the standard. That's what you'll expect to find. Guess what else? Okay.
Yeah.
Most of your contractors are going to be charging a 20% profit on top of what their actual costs are. So do you want to be making less than your contractor? Now you say, oh, well, I'm going to be making more than my contractor. No, you're not, because you're making a percentage on your investment. Okay. The investment for the contractor is their work and their time. They're making 20% on whatever the actual cost is going to be. If your contractor is going to charge you 20%, don't you think you need to be making 20% on your deal as well? Now we're way over. Thanks for joining us. I love these conversations. It makes me want to go out and start looking at rehabs right now.
I've got an hour and a half. I'm looking at a property. So
happy investing. Bill, I'll see you back here next time. And
you got it.
See the rest of you guys here. I'd love to hear your stories, Bill, and I would love to hear your stories about properties that you've seen, about offers that you made, about the deals that you got going on. InvestorGuysPodcast.com, Bill at InvestorGuysPodcast.com, Kevin, or contact at InvestorGuysPodcast.com. We'll see you next time.
Thanks now.
All right.